Lord be with you. You've heard me say many times that I believe that the three greatest psychologists I've ever read would be Gautama Siddhartha, the Buddha, and Jesus, the Christ, and William, the Shakespeare. So in today's homily, I want to talk about the stages of life, pre-life, breathing life, and afterlife. And I want to pick up on that theme. So I've chosen a reading actually from Shakespeare this morning, from As You Like It. It's from Act 2, Scene 7. It's a well-known passage. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts, his acts being 7 ages. At first, the infant, mewling and puking in the nurse's arms. Then the whining schoolboy with satchel and shining morning face creeping like snail unwillingly to school. And then the lover, sighing like furnace with a woeful ballad made to his mistress' eyebrow. Then a soldier, full of strange oaths and bearded like the pard, jealous in honour, sudden and quick in quarrel, seeking the bubble reputation even in the cannon's mouth. And then the justice, in fair round belly, with good capon lined, with eyes severe and beard of formal cut, full of wise saws and modern instances. And so he plays his part. The 6th age shifts into the lean and slippered pantaloon, with spectacles on nose and pouch inside. His youthful hose well saved, a world too wide for his shrunk shank, and his big manly voice, turning again towards childish treble, pipes and whistles in his sound. Last scene of all that ends this strange eventful history is second childishness and mere oblivion. Sans teeth, sans eyes, sans taste, sans everything. Words inspired by God. Today I am 71 years and 3 weeks old, which means that I've lived for 25,922 days. And each one of them seems like it's a different incarnation. And in a sense it is. In every 24-hour period, every single one of us has a time in between dreaming and waking, when we're in a deep, dreamless sleep, when there is no sense of self. There are no memories. The senses aren't operating. I don't think. I don't feel. I don't know who I am or where I am or even if I am. And then the dream picks up and we go online, and then you wake up in the morning and your senses go online and your memories come back to you and your sense of separate self is there and you continue the journey. But every day in some senses marks a separation point. Every day represents an incarnation. Every day represents some kind of a sacrament where you reinitiate the journey of your evolution into Christ consciousness or Buddha nature. And so I want to revisit that topic today. Last Sunday I spoke about, at one stage, the sacraments of life. And I've been thinking a lot about it this week. And I want to go into more depth about it this week. I want to revisit that topic and go into more depth in it. And I'm going to make 4 main points this morning. First one I will say is, who's counting? And then secondly, I want to talk about the sacraments of birth and before. Thirdly, the sacraments of the breathing body. And then fourthly, the sacraments of death and thereafter. They are the 4 points I'll make this morning. So, who's counting? So, if in fact every day is an incarnation, and every day in some senses is a milestone, it's a way station on the road from God's womb, where we got conceived, to God's heart, where we wind up. You know, how do you count the sacraments? If the sacraments are the kind of the sacred understanding of the milestones and the way stations on the road, how do you count the sacraments? It depends who you are. If you're a materialistic scientist, there are no sacraments because there is no such thing as even as consciousness. Free will is an illusion, and basically we're just, taxis for neurons that fire indiscriminately and randomly, and there is no purpose to life, and there certainly isn't any sacredness about life. So there are no sacraments whatsoever if you're a materialistic scientist. If you're a strict Protestant, you're being taught that there are 2 sacraments in life. 2 sacraments instituted by Jesus, and they would be baptism and communion. For mainstream Protestantism, those are the 2 sacraments. Now, that is not to say that there aren't any other sacred moments in the Protestant thinking. There are, but as sacraments go, there are just 2 sacraments for the Protestant churches. Catholicism believes that there are 7, and I went into those in much more depth last week. So there's baptism and confirmation and penance and Eucharist and matrimony and ordination and extreme unction or anointing of the sick. And Shakespeare had the same notion that life proceeds in 7 great stages, that there are 7 great sacraments to life. There's the infant, there's the schoolboy, there's the lover, there's the soldier, there's the judge, there's the retiree, and then there's the person who's preparing to die. So there are 7 stages for Shakespeare. The great developmental psychologist Erik Erikson claimed that there were 8 great stages to the human trajectory. So in his thinking, there would be like 8 sacraments. But if in fact every single day, is a new incarnation, you could well say that every day is a sacrament. And so I've celebrated today 25,922 sacraments in this journey. But when I think about it even more deeply, every breath is a new beginning. Every time you take a breath in and you breathe out, you're literally exchanging millions of molecules of matter with everybody else, in the church today and everything that surrounds you. And so typically, when we're busy, we breathe about 18 times a minute. When you're meditating, you can get it right down to about 3 or even 2 times a minute. So if you're a fairly easygoing person, let's say you breathe 10 times a minute. That's 600 times an hour, 24 hours a day. So by now, I've breathed 373,276,800 times. Are these sacraments? Is each one of these a sacrament, a total, or a new beginning? So it just depends on who's counting. But I want to compromise today, somewhere between 373,276,800, and 0. I'm going to pick the number 27. And I've been thinking about this during the week. For me, I believe there are 27 great milestones in the journey from God's womb, where we start, to God's heart, where we finish up. And they'll be the points that I make this morning. And there are 4 great hinge sacraments in these 27. The first hinge is when we emanate from source, when God self-fractures. And the last great hinge is when we reunite, we get reabsorbed into the all, the unconditional all. They're the 2 great hinges. And they have to do with spirit. Spirit, is the force that allows us to come into being as souls and to merge with God finally. And then at the other end of the scale, you have the hinge of breath. The first breath you take when you're born signifies the incarnational life. And the last breath you take as you die, is the end of the incarnational phase. But it's interesting, all 4 of these hinges have to do with spirit. Because in many, many languages, the word breath and spirit and life are a single word. In Hebrew, the word ruach means the breath of God. It means the spirit of God. It means to be alive. In Greek, we use the word pneuma. In Swahili, we have the word pepo. And in English, we use the word inspiration. To inspire means to take spirit in, or to be alive, or to be creative, or to breathe in. And to expire means to die, or to let go of spirit. So the breath, or spirit, is the key in these 4 great hinges of the entire journey. So that's the first point I make. So I want to look now, break up these 27 sacraments and talk about the 3 great sections of it that I see. So the first group of them, and there are 7 in this basket, I'm going to call the sacraments of birth and before. And the very first one then obviously has to do with, at some stage, God emanates soul. So God knows herself to be, and God totally loves whom she finds herself to be. In Hinduism, we call this Sat, Chit, Ananda, being, knowing self, and bliss. And so in some senses, that is the essence of the divine, being, knowing self, and loving utterly self. But it's very difficult for the all that is to have experiences because there's nothing else except the self. So at some stage, God self-fractures. God emanates. God plays a game of hide-and-go-seek with herself to try to pretend they're parts that aren't her, to see if those parts can remember who they really, really are. So imagine for a moment the sunrise. There's some beautiful sunrises at the moment. When the sun comes up in the morning and it sends these shoots of light out into the morning sky. But the shoots of rays of light, they cannot be separated from the sun. So in some senses, it's an illusion. It's not really real. There is only the sun and its emanations, but these emanations appear to be distinct. And that's what souls are. And that's the very first sacrament, it seems to me. The emanation from God, the rays that come from the sun, which is the all that is. Many different spiritual traditions hold this notion of a kind of a self-fracturing, holographic, fractals of God. So that for me would be the very first sacrament. That's the first great hinge where God emanates into individual souls. The second great sacrament for me would be then that these souls organize themselves in what you could call soul pods, our soul families. Groups of souls get together and they make a commitment to each other to try to help each other to remember who they really are, because the whole object of the exercise is we will continue to put more and more limits on ourselves as souls, to plumb the depths of separation from Source, to see, even if in the darkest places, we can remember that we are God and that there is only God. So we make these contracts with groups of souls that we will grow together, that we will challenge each other, that we will support each other in this journey. And we make this commitment to each other that we will do this by putting more and more limitations on ourselves in order to plumb more and more deeply our ability to love anyway. So that would be the second sacrament for me. The third sacrament then would be, at some stage, we volunteer for incarnation in various dimensions. And all souls don't just come to planet Earth. There are many, many dimensions in which souls, volunteer to go. And each dimension has a different form of limitation, of separation from Source, in order to give the souls the opportunity of remembering anyway, of overcoming the limitations in order to dig more deeply into the love that's at the source of each one of us. So at some stage, sacrament number 3 would be a volunteering for some kind of incarnation on some kind of dimension, sometimes planet Earth, sometimes not planet Earth. The fourth sacrament is we then make what I've called preconception contracts with each other. As these souls get ready to incarnate, they're not going to come in exactly at the same time, because some of these souls will volunteer to be our parents or our grandparents in a lifetime. Some of these souls will volunteer to be our children in a lifetime. Some will volunteer to be our siblings in a lifetime. Some will volunteer to be our friends. And another group, a very important group, will volunteer to be our enemies, because we learn as much from our enemies as we do from our friends. There are two kinds of people we tend to experience. There are our fertilizers in our lives, people who love us unconditionally, and they're very, very good for our self-image and our confidence. But if there were only the fertilizers in our lives, we'd all become narcissists. So we arrange to have enemy figures in our lives. And this is true not just as individuals, it's true as cultures, it's true as nations, that there are enemy figures, and their job is to be weeders in our lives, to point out to us our inadequacies, even if we don't want to see it. And so we make these preconception contracts as a soul pod to come in and to play a particular drama. And we set up the dramas in such a way that we apportion roles to give each person the ideal opportunity to develop whatever virtue they want to work on in an incarnation. Maybe for one lifetime, I'm going to focus on courage. Another time, I'm going to focus on compassion. Another time, on forgiveness. Another time, on patience. Another time, on a sense of humor. So we come in and we create this drama, but the problem is we forget when we come in. But the reason I've chosen Shakespeare today is in some senses, we're like a Shakespearean troupe. And every year we put on a different drama. This one was As You Like It. Next year it'll be Hamlet. The year after that, it'll be Macbeth. It's the same people, but we're playing different roles, completely different roles. We may change genders or, races even, but that's not important. The object of the exercise is to develop our acting skills. And by acting skills, I mean learning how to love more and more unconditionally. That's the entire objective of every incarnation. And we've chosen very, very carefully the people we encounter, whether they're family, friends, or enemies. We're here by preconception contract in order to provide the ideal circumstance in which every single one of us can do the kind of growing that we want to do. So that's the preconception contract. That was number 4. Number 5 for me is, I call it the launching pad. I had a really powerful experience several years ago where a friend of mine, who was also a clinical psychologist, hypnotically regressed me, and had an experience of my life between lifetimes, what Buddhism or Hinduism will call the Bardo state. And at the end of that period, I had this really powerful experience of being what I can only describe as on a launching pad, where the souls are now ready for incarnation in various different dimensions. And we're all together in some kind of extraordinary aula maxima, some great hall. And some great angelic being is orchestrating this departure. And the experience was such that any thought that any member had was immediately communicated through this angelic being to everybody else. So each one of us is privy to the thoughts and the hopes and the expectations of everybody else. So we're encouraging each other. But there's this sense of, as you can imagine, of both, trepidation, anxiety, hope, joy about this new adventure, because really, we've forgotten what it was like the last time we were down here, and so we're a little bit trepidatious. And so this launching pad is the next, the 5th great sacrament. Number 6 for me is, I call it the docking of the soul with the developing fetus or embryo. At some stage after a woman, one of the preconception contract group who agreed to be the mother in this instance is going to conceive from the father who agreed to be part of this group, and they're going to create a life form which is awaiting the arrival of a soul. And the soul is going to dock with this at some stage. That would be, for me, sacrament number 6. So, in fact, I believe that that's actually how a baby gets baptized. That the baby is baptized in the amniotic fluid of the mother's womb. That's the baptism, because it is the commitment to incarnation and to mission. That's what the baby is saying in docking with this. Now, not all pregnancies are successful in the sense that sometimes there's a miscarriage, and that may be part of the contract, or sometimes I believe it's that the soul gets cold feet. And having experienced, spacelessness and timelessness and Christ consciousness, to find itself now confined to this tiny little embryonic self, trying to learn how to move these particular appendages. Sometimes it gets literally cold feet and says, I'm out of here. It's like Christ in Gethsemane, let this chalice pass from me. Except Christ went on and said, no, I'm going to see it through. Sometimes souls, I believe, say, let this chalice pass from me. I'm serious. I don't want to do it right now. And they go back. And so the fetus is miscarried. So, but the docking with the fetus for me is sacrament number 6. And then sacrament number 7 is the actual birth and the first breath. And there you got spirit again. Spirit, ruach, pepo, pneuma, inspiration. There's spirit. It's the breath and the life of spirit, the first breath that the child takes. And for me, I would call this, in Catholic terminology, I would call this the Sacrament of Confirmation. Because the baptism took place in utero when the baby signed up for a mission, and now it's confirming, yes, I'm going to stay with this process. I'm going to become a land animal. I'm going to see it through into the next phase, of my mission. And so for me, that's the Sacrament of Confirmation. The actual first breath, it's the personal Pentecost. At the original Pentecost in John's Gospel, Jesus breathed upon the apostles and he said, receive the Holy Spirit. So the breath was the reception, the breath was the first Pentecost. And every one of us has our individual personal Pentecost. As we take our very first breath on planet Earth, that is the Pentecost. So there would be the first group of sacraments that I've called the sacraments of birth and before. Point number 3, and the second group of sacraments I'm going to call the sacraments of the breathing body. And so now that you've taken your first breath, you have fully inhabited this spacesuit of yours, this vehicle that you need for mission, what sacraments now proceed? And so the first sacrament, I believe, is the development of an ego, there's a sense of personal self is beginning to emerge, and it takes about 8 months for that to happen, because initially the little child cannot differentiate between self and mother. There's just one, organism. It's the mother-child complex, and the child is totally convinced that it is in charge of this organism. Around the age of 8 months, this horrible realization begins to dawn that we are actually separate beings, and actually all the power resides in the other side. That's really, really frightening, the emergence of the ego. And it's a huge step forward. It's part of the journey where we agreed we will separate ourselves more and more fully from God in order to experience limitation and still try to figure out, can I love anyway? Can I remember anyway? Can I know that I'm God stuff anyway? And so the ego is the next step in that separation process. And every one of us as little children, we then have to develop all kinds of defense mechanisms to compensate for this horrible realization that there are two, not one. There's a mother and child, and she's in the driving seat, and she might abandon me. Am I good enough? Will I be loved enough? So the ego is the next sacrament. Then a little bit later on, the baby it joins the kind of the hominid group. It stands upright around 10 months or a year of age. It stands up and it begins to wander around. Now this is a self-empowerment, but it's also the next phase of separation. So now for the first time ever, the child can choose to go away from the mother. It's exploring, but it's leaving the mother. So it's part of kind of the distancing from source and from God. Can I separate from mother and still remember that she is? Initially it's easy because every so often the child is going to look around and make sure mother can be seen, and if it can't be seen, he's going to freak out and start running to find her. But it's the beginning, it's another part of the separation process from source. Around maybe 16, 17, 18 months, depending on the child, we then become Homo sapiens. We develop language skills. And even if the first words we speak are dada or mama, very, very quickly, every one of us is going to learn me and mine. And those two words become really important in the child's vocabulary. And that's further part of the separation. The child is now very definitely separating even from mommy and from daddy. So that's a sacrament, and it's part of the journey away from God further and further and further, still testing myself to see, can I still remember who I am and that there is only God? So that will be the next sacrament for me. At that stage as well, so there's I call it the Sacrament of Egocentricity. There's the need for the child to self-empower or to be self-concerned. You cannot develop compassion subsequently until you first operate from a sense of separate self. So egocentricity becomes a very important sacrament in that process. Around the age of 7 comes the next sacrament, and it's, the use of reason, really Homo sapiens sapiens, that children can begin to reason. That for the first time ever, a child can become moral. A 4-year-old child is neither moral nor immoral, they're simply amoral. They do not have the neuronal wiring yet in place to be able to differentiate and to be able to take another person's perspective. So a very simple example, if I take a 4-year-old child who knows her colours, and I show her this and I say, what colour is that? And she says, white. And I say, what colour is that? And she says, green. What colour is that? Green. What colour is that? White. What colour am I looking at? And the 4-year-old child will say, white. Because the 4-year-old child is looking at white, and she can't come around to this side of it and put her mind to my perspective, so she can only see her own perspective, even though she knows both colours. She cannot say, you are looking at green while I am looking at white. Until the age of about 5 or 6, certainly by 7. At that stage, a child can adopt another person's perspective. And only then can we become moral creatures. Only then can we really learn compassion or see another person's perspective. That's a hugely important, sacrament right there. Very shortly after that, we get inculcated with the next sacrament, and it's the sacrament of, I call it ethnocentricity. We are told that our group are specially chosen by God. Whether it's our nation or our religion or our tribe, whatever it is, we're always special. So you got to think tribal, move from egocentricity, but think tribally. There's the bad guys out there who are always trying to get us, or they're the people who are damned because they don't know Jesus, or they're not Buddhists, or whatever that is, whatever the theology tells us. And now there's ethnocentricity becomes the next sacrament. The next one happens around puberty, 12, 13, 14, a bit earlier first in some places. And this, for the first time ever, it means that now the boy or the girl literally can become the conduit for new souls to enter into the planet. So for the first time ever, they're physiologically capable of being channels, because it's part of their preconception contract that there will be other souls perhaps come through them. Now the physical ability is there at this stage. A great sacrament that goes with this is the realization on the part of children at this age that they want to go beyond ethnocentricity. They want to ask questions: why are we bombing people in Iraq? Why is it that people in other nations are bad? Why is it that Protestants can't go to heaven if you're raised Catholic? And they begin to ask these kinds of questions. And at this stage, society tries to shut them up. Society is not very happy. Society wants to stop growing at the age when we become ethnocentric and believe that our nation, right or wrong, our tribe, right or wrong, our religion, right or wrong. And so teenagers are problematic for us because they begin to think outside the box. They begin to think what I would call ecocentrically. They begin to think about the whole system, the entire planet, all the species on the planet. The next sacrament, I believe, would be the first serious romantic relationship. The first great stirrings, in the human heart of wanting to kind of complement your gender, in the sense that when we decide to incarnate, souls don't have gender, they don't have race, they don't have socioeconomic status, they don't have IQ level, they don't have educational attainment. All souls are precious, bite-sized pieces of God. But when we decide to incarnate, we have to put on extraordinary limits on ourselves, and one is gender. We have to be born either into a female body or a male body. And so in some senses, either psychically or physiologically, there's a complementary part to us that we always seek. And the first great love affair, the first great romantic relationship is an effort on behalf of the soul to try to reach its fullness. It's not just about sexual attraction, that's only a means to an end. It's for the soul to kind of regain its unity consciousness. So that becomes a hugely important sacrament, the first great romantic relationship. The next one will be the profession. What am I going to offer to the world? How will I train? The world needs many, many different kinds of people. We need carpenters, we need mechanics, we need psychologists, we need farmers, we need artists, we need all of these people. So how am I going to prepare myself in order to offer something back to the world? But even more importantly than the profession I adopt is the mission I undertake, because there's a difference between mission and profession. We didn't come here to be farmers, or psychologists or mechanics. We came here to develop a particular kind of virtue, and we choose the profession in the service of the virtue. So I choose a particular profession because it will afford me the opportunity of developing the particular virtue that I really came to work on this lifetime. So mission and profession go side by side. It's a hugely important sacrament. The next great sacrament then would be making a lifelong commitment to a relationship, whether it's a marriage contract or a contract for ordination, that you're going to say, I'm in this for the long haul, and I'm going to learn how to grow, how to listen, how to communicate, how to kind of give in sometimes, how to pare back my ego. And I'll do this in a committed relationship of some kind, that becomes really important. That's the next great sacrament. The next one, I believe, is when you become a parent and you've now channeled a new life into the world, and you fall head over heels in love. And any of you who are fathers or mothers, you know that, no matter how much you loved your spouse, once you saw your child for the first time, your first child for the first time, there was nothing like it you'd ever experienced before, And it's not just the remembrance of the preconception contract, it's the realization that this child has come to teach you, and you've come to protect it and to guard it. Every child is a prophet sent to remind us of where we've really come from before we get too lost in the journey. And every parent is to protect the child so that innocence, that ability to remain on course is protected as so much as the father or the mother can do that. So that would be the next great sacrament, becoming a parent. maybe 20, 25 years after that, is the next great sacrament. And it's the sacrament of becoming a grandparent. And those of you who are grandparents, you know the extraordinary joy when you don't have the practical responsibilities of educating the child or looking after the child. And there's a kind of relationship which is very different from the relationship you had with your own kids. There's a special word in Swahili for this that translates as a joking relationship. In Swahili cultures, you can have a joking relationship with somebody who's 2 generations above you or below you. You cannot have a joking relationship with somebody who's 1 generation above you, a parent, or 1 generation below you, a child of yours. But there's a special name for the relationship you can have with a grandfather, grandmother, or a grandchild. And so I believe that at that stage, when you become a grandparent, you're the wisdom carrier of the family. That is your sacramental duty. You are the wisdom carrier for the entire family. The next sacrament I would call the Sacrament of Retiring. At some stage you've decided that the profession you've undertaken, you're going to wind that down for a variety of reasons, but you're going to wind it down. And at this stage I really believe that, you're going to go beyond family, where the child at some stage was egocentric and then was invited to be ethnocentric and then finally became ecocentric. You who were fascinated by your own grandchildren are now, as a retiree, aware of the fact that all the children of the world are precious, no matter what their skin colour is, no matter what their language is. So as a retiree, your sacramental duty is to become the wisdom carrier and the mentor for the world's children. The whole world's children, not just your own grandkids. And that would be, for me, that's the block of what I would call then the sacraments of the body as it breathes. My 4th point then in the 3rd section of sacraments begins with the sacrament of physical death. It's a hugely important sacrament. And it's especially poignant for me today as I celebrate that my dearest friend, Arlen Brownstein, who's lost her 97-year-old mother Saturday last week on the 21st of October, and this morning lost her father at age 100. That there comes a time when we shuffle off this mortal coil. So there's the coming the physical death, and it hinges again on spirit, on breath. It was the last breath that Isaac Brownstein took at 2:30 this morning, witnessed by his daughter. That was his transition. That's the first sacrament on the next stage of his journey. And so it's the realization that, this great hinging on spirit, hinging on breath, and the dying of the physical body is the first sacrament in the final section. However, I believe that the etheric body, the energy template of which the physical body was a card copy or a printout, it remains around. The energy remains around for several days. And, if you've ever had out-of-body experiences yourself, you know that when you inhabit a different level of consciousness and you can actually see your physical body lying in the bed, but you somehow are floating on the ceiling or elsewhere, you realize that the part of you that's floating is a look-alike. It's very, very similar to the one that's actually lying in the bed. Not exactly like, but very, very like. And the danger is that people can get stuck at that stage. They don't realize, that they can't rejoin the physical body that's on the bed. They're still identified with this kind of etheric body. And so there comes the second sacrament of this stage is letting go of the etheric body, realizing that that was just a template and letting go of that. And then you experience yourself in your astral form. The astral body, according to Hinduism, was the place, in which all of the experiences of the physical incarnation just ended are archived for future reference. So that when you come back in your next incarnation, all of those experiences, all of that growing is available to you. It gets hardwired into your psyche. You don't have to remember the details of it. It's hardwired into the psyche of the next iteration of yourself. And so the astral body is the archiving of all those experiences, but you have to die from that as well. That's the 3rd sacrament on the other side. You have to realize, yes, that was the learning, those were the experiences, that is the archive of the incarnation just ended, but that is not who I am either. And so you're invited into a 4th sacrament at this stage. And the 4th one is the re-identification with the soul the soul self. You realize now fully, I thought I was a physical body for 71 years and 3 weeks. And then for 3 days I thought I was the etheric body. And then for 49 more days I thought I was the astral body. And now I realize I'm not. This is who I really am. I'm a soul. So that would be the next sacrament. The second to last would be the reunification with the soul group. Now there's big cheers, it's like you walk in, everybody starts singing, "Happy birthday to you." You realize they planned a surprise party for you. That all of those who got back before you have been waiting anxiously for your return, and now the entire soul pod is reunited. And there's hijinks, absolute hijinks. And so you begin comparing notes. It's like you say, what was it like for you in this lifetime? What do you think you learned? And, when you go back down, what task are you going to set yourself now? Or what kind of a drama should we plan the next time? Will it be in a totally different culture? Will we change genders? What will be the kind of the plot so that we learn whatever it is we want to learn the next time? So there's this extraordinary uniting going on. And then, of course, the very last one again hinges on spirit. And at some stage, God folds up the game of Lila. And God, having culled all of these billions of experiences through the self-fractured, holograms of herself that she created as souls, it's like bees coming back with their pollen and their stories to the hive at the end of the harvesting. We're reunited. And once more, there is only God. The sense of separate self dissolves completely, and there is only God once more. So in this entire trajectory, there's this sense of self is like the center of gravity of the identity. But it has to move constantly. If it gets stuck, we're in trouble. And it can get stuck at any stage. It can get stuck during the incarnational phase, and it can get stuck in the post-incarnational phase. So we can get stuck in life, never grow up and become the puer eternus, the kind of Peter Pan that doesn't want any responsibility. Or we can get stuck thinking that we are our bodies. Or we can get fixated on the fact that we are our thoughts. Or we can get fixated on a particular relationship we're in, or a particular job we do. The center of gravity of the self has to keep moving and moving and moving. Even after the physical death, it can still get stuck. I can still think, I'm the etheric body, or still think I'm the astral body. We have to learn to keep the center of gravity moving. And so if there is one navigating tool, one orienting principle that I think can guide that entire process so the center of gravity can keep moving from God's womb where it started to God's heart where it finishes, it's to be able to say with Jesus, maybe the most profound thing he ever said, a very, very pithy statement, to be able to say that to yourself and know that it's true, to be able to stand in front of yourself in a mirror and say, the Father and I are one.